He sits by the window of a quiet hotel room in Paris. The light is soft, filtered through curtains heavy with dust and silence. His hands, those same hands that once played 1,000 characters, now tremble slightly as he holds a cup of black coffee. The interviewer's recorder is on the table, red light blinking, waiting for words that took years to find. I lost love, trust, and years of my life, he says, almost to himself. The voice is slower, lower, not the defiant man of the courtroom, but someone who finally stopped performing. In 2022, the trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard became more than a legal battle. It was a global spectacle, a theater of pain broadcast in real time. Millions watched every raised eyebrow, every tear, every word dissected by strangers. Hollywood had turned into a courtroom, and the courtroom had turned into a stage. When the verdict was read, the internet exploded with applause and outrage. Justice, they called it. But behind closed doors, the man at the center of it all sat in silence. In that silence, there were no winners, only echoes of what once was love. 3 years later, at 61, Johnny Depp breaks that silence, not to defend himself, but to understand what went wrong. For the first time, he admits what the trial took from him, not fame, not money, but the ability to believe in something pure. The truth, he says softly, became something people used, not something we felt. Outside, Paris hums with indifference. Inside, a man who once belonged to every camera lens speaks only to memory. The world wanted justice, but he wanted peace, and peace, he learned, demands more courage than any courtroom ever could. The question now is not who lied or who won. It's something far more human, far more haunting. When love turns into war, can justice ever heal what the heart has destroyed before the world saw courtrooms and confessions? There was light, the golden kind that follows a man who has spent decades turning pain into art. Johnny Depp had always belonged to that rare category of stars who seemed untouchable, like a myth that walked among mortals. He wasn't just an actor, he was an atmosphere. Cigarette smoke, guitar strings, a whisper of rebellion. Everything about him felt poetic and dangerous at once. Then came Amber Heard, radiant, sharp, ambitious. When they first met on the set of The Rum Diary in 2009, she was still at the dawn of her Hollywood ascent. He was the legend who had already lived a dozen lifetimes through his characters. She was everything that reminded him of youth, fierce, unpredictable, unafraid of fire. To her, he was mystery itself, a man who spoke through silence, who carried the scars of every role he had ever played. Their chemistry was immediate, undeniable. The cameras caught it, but so did the eyes of everyone around them. What began as fiction soon slipped into life. They looked like two souls that recognized each other in another lifetime. A crew member would later recall, it was the kind of love story Hollywood adores: beauty and danger, fame and fragility, written in the same breath. When they married in 2015, the world celebrated it like a fairy tale. Paparazzi flashes painted their faces in gold. Magazine covers spoke of the pirate and the siren. To the public, they were the embodiment of passion, the perfect union of two free spirits who refused to play by anyone's rules. But behind the photographs and laughter, small fractures were already forming. Friends described moments of tenderness followed by sudden storms. The same intensity that drew them together began to consume them. Their home, a blend of rock, in-roll chaos, and cinematic glamour, slowly became a battleground of emotions no one could name. For a while, they tried to protect the illusion, Red carpets replaced therapy. Interviews replaced honesty. Depp, always the romantic outlaw, spoke of love as a sanctuary. "She's stunning," he said once, smiling with a quiet pride. Heard echoed the same sentiment, calling him the kindest man shed ever known. But love, under the microscope of fame, behaves differently. Every gesture becomes a headline. Every silence becomes a rumor. By 2016, the cracks could no longer be hidden. Whispers of arguments, broken objects, tears behind closed doors, tabloids fed on speculation, crafting narratives from fragments. Hollywood, always hungry for drama, turned them into characters once again. Only this time, the script was crueler. What neither of them realized was how the world would claim ownership of their pain. Fans chose sides before either of them could even speak. Hashtags became weapons. Empathy became entertainment. The relationship that had once thrived on intensity now existed only through accusations and defense statements. Still, if one looks closely at those early years, there was something profoundly human beneath the chaos, a search for understanding. Both came from childhoods marked by instability, by the sound of doors closing too hard. They recognized the brokenness in each other and mistook it for connection. What they called love was, in many ways, a mirror reflecting both their brilliance and their wounds. Depp, the man who could become anyone, struggled to remain himself. Fame had long been a costume, and love with Amber felt like the last attempt to feel real again. Heard, meanwhile, found herself trapped between admiration and self-defense, fighting for identity in a world that wanted her either as a muse or a monster. The illusion persisted even as the foundation cracked. They were photographed holding hands after public fights, smiling for cameras that captured everything except the truth. Theirs was a relationship built not only on passion but on performance, one that demanded applause to survive. In 2018, when Amber published her op-ed about domestic abuse without naming him, the illusion shattered completely. The story that began with whispered love now echoed with shouted pain. Careers trembled. Allegiances shifted. Hollywood, once their stage, turned its spotlight into interrogation. To outsiders, it looked like betrayal. To those closer, it felt like implosion. They had turned love into myth, and myth into tragedy. As one producer put it, they were two actors trapped in a play that never stopped, except now. The audience had the script. Yet even in those final moments before the war of words began, there were signs of what they both feared most, not hatred, but loss. "You'll never see me again," she reportedly said one night, leaving their home for the last time. He didn't answer. Silence became their final dialogue. By the time the lawsuit was filed, there was no turning back. Their names, once synonymous with art and beauty, became headlines written in anger. The illusion was gone. What remained was something raw, painful, and public. And yet in every photo, in every clip replayed millions of times online, there was still a trace of what once existed between them. The way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. The way she smiled when she thought the camera wasn't rolling. That was the ghost of their love, fragile, misunderstood, but undeniably real. They had once built a dream that the world envied. But dreams, under the harsh light of judgment, tend to disintegrate. The public believed they knew everything. But in truth, they had only seen the movie trailer, not the quiet, unedited version that played in the dark. And behind that curtain of fame, two people stood alone, trying to remember how love had once felt before it became evidence. It was never just a love story. It was a collision of two worlds, one made of shadows, the other a fire. Somewhere between their laughter and their silences, Johnny and Amber stopped hearing each other. What remained were echoes of old pain, replaying like scenes from a film neither wanted to finish watching. Behind closed doors, far from the noise of cameras and the choreography of public life, their world shrank. Friends who once saw them at parties later recalled long stretches of absence. They disappeared into themselves. One of them said, "The mansion that had once been alive with music and guests began to echo differently, not with celebration, but with the heavy stillness of two people afraid to speak." For Depp, silence was both refuge and weapon. He had always been a man who hid inside music, inside characters, inside the safety of performance. But this time, the role wouldn't end when the director said, "Cut." The man who once made the world believe in outlaws and dreamers now found himself living a version of chaos that no script could fix. Amber, in turn, had her own ghosts. She had fought hard for a voice in a world that often dismissed women who spoke too loudly. Loving a man like Johnny adored. Unpredictable. Worshipped by millions meant living in a shadow that could swallow her whole. There were moments when she felt seen, cherished, even protected. But there were also nights when she felt like a reflection, fragile, distorted, unable to tell where he ended and she began. Their love was a cycle of need and defense, tenderness and terror. Both were trying to heal through each other, a dangerous kind of therapy where affection becomes anesthesia. He offered her his brokenness as proof of trust. She offered him her defiance as proof of strength. But no one can carry the weight of another's wounds forever. When the arguments came, they were not about truth, they were about survival. Each fought to preserve their version of reality, to be believed, to be right. Words became weapons. Silence became punishment. The home that once smelled of paint and perfume began to taste like resentment. There were still soft moments. Though mornings when he'd play guitar while she read near the window, nights when they'd laugh at old movies until dawn. Those moments fooled them into thinking everything could still be saved. But like actors between takes, they knew it wasn't real anymore. They were performing comfort, rehearsing normality, avoiding the inevitable scene that would destroy the story. By 2016, it was too late. The police, the tabloids, the fans, everyone became part of their private life. The air grew thinner. Their arguments now had witnesses. And when Amber finally walked away, she didn't just leave a relationship, she left a narrative half-written, one that the world would finish for her. For Johnny, the aftermath was suffocating. His reputation, built over 40 years of artistry, was torn apart by headlines that never slept. He tried to keep working, but the calls slowed down. Projects disappeared. The man who once made audiences believe in magic now watched as belief itself turned against him. It felt like being erased. He would later admit, he turned to painting, to guitars, to long nights surrounded by friends who spoke softly and understood silence. But even in those quiet hours, he couldn't escape the memory of what love had become, a mirror that reflected his worst self back at him. You start wondering, he said in one interview, how much of what they said was true, and how much of it was you. Amber, too, found herself caught in the machinery of public hatred. Social media, once her platform for activism, turned into a battlefield. Every post, every gesture was dissected, mocked, weaponized. She became a symbol not of strength, but of controversy. And yet, in rare interviews, her tone was weary, not triumphant. I didn't want to be right. she said once. I just wanted to be free. There is a peculiar cruelty in fame. It doesn't allow grief to be private. Theirs was not just the end of a love affair, it was the dissection of intimacy under fluorescent lights. Every text message, every tear, every bruise became evidence. What had once been a secret language between lovers now belonged to lawyers and headlines. And somewhere in the middle of it all, truth became irrelevant. What mattered was who could tell the better story. In that sense, they were both storytellers trained to make emotion convincing, to turn pain into art. The trial was simply the final performance of a love story gone wrong, with the world as its uninvited audience. But deep inside, both knew what the verdict could never capture, the quiet regret of two people who once loved each other so intensely that it scared them. You can't unlove someone, Johnny said in one private conversation later leaked online. You just stop recognizing the person you loved. After the verdict, as the noise faded and the public moved on to the next scandal, the silence between them remained. It wasn't hatred anymore, it was exhaustion. They had burned through everything: affection, rage, forgiveness. What remained was the ashes of two people who had given too much of themselves to be understood. And yet, amid that devastation, there was a strange kind of truth, the one neither of them could deny, that love, even when it destroys, leaves a trace of something sacred, a memory of connection too deep to erase. In 2025, when Johnny finally spoke again, his words carried the weight of that realization. He didn't accuse. He didn't defend. He simply said what years of silence had taught him. I think we both tried to save each other. But maybe love isn't supposed to save. Maybe it's just supposed to show us who we are, even if we don't like what we see. Amber has not responded publicly to those words. But those who know her say she listens not with anger, but with the quiet understanding that comes only after survival. The hidden truth was never about who was guilty. It was about what love can do to two people when the need to be believed becomes stronger than the need to be kind. And in the ruins of their story lies the question that will haunt them both. How do you forgive someone who mirrors the part of yourself you wish never existed? By the time the world turned its gaze toward that Virginia courtroom in 2022, the love story had already died. What remained was its autopsy. Cameras lined the halls like vultures. Commentators spoke of justice, truth, and accountability. But beneath the noise lay something older. Sat are two human beings trying and failing to reclaim dignity from the wreckage. The trial wasn't just about law. It was theater, confession, revenge, and mourning all at once. Every moment was a performance. Amber's trembling voice as she relived the nights she said she feared for her safety. Johnny's calm precision. The weary smile of a man used to being doubted. Each side came armed with recordings, photographs, text messages, fragments of a love dismembered into evidence. But what shocked the world wasn't the violence of the accusations. It was the emotional truth that bled through them. Love, stripped of privacy and pride, revealed itself as a battlefield where tenderness had once lived. The public chose sides. One camp crowned him the victim of falsehood. Another called her the survivor of silence. Yet neither label fit. They were both too human for simplicity. Johnny's testimony was calm, measured, and devastating. I wanted the truth, he said, not vengeance. But maybe they're the same thing when you've lost everything. When asked what he hoped to gain, he paused before answering, my name. And maybe some peace. Those who watched closely saw something else, the exhaustion of a man realizing that even victory could not cleanse pain. Behind every sarcastic remark, every lawyer's objection, there was grief. the kind that no court could rule on. For Amber, the trial became a crucifixion. Every tear questioned, every hesitation dissected. The same world that once adored her now scrutinized her down to each breath. She, too, lost more than she admitted, not just her reputation, but her belief that justice could ever feel fair. If you win, she once told a friend, you're still broken. If you lose, you're ruined. And in the end, Johnny won. Officially, legally, triumphantly. The verdict was read. Applause erupted online. His fans cried, her supporters mourned. But as the noise reached its highest pitch, he sat still. For the first time, his victory looked eerily like defeat. Because what do you do when the world finally believes you, but you no longer believe in yourself? Later, in an interview that few noticed amid the chaos, he said something quieter, more honest than any headline: we both lost. She lost her voice. I lost my peace. And somewhere in between, truth lost its meaning. That was the revelation. That justice, the kind written on paper, cannot repair what love destroys. The trial had ended, but the story hadn't. It continued in whispers, in public fatigue, in the uneasy silence that follows every storm. Hollywood moved on to its next scandal. But for those who once loved, there is no next. Only aftermath. Years later, when Depp returned to film, his face seemed different, not older, but emptied. The mischievous spark was still there, but dimmer, as if he had made peace with not needing to be understood. He painted more. He played music again. He laughed, but softly, like a man who had learned the price of every word. He no longer spoke of Amber directly, only of the years that taught me to listen. And in those words was something profound, not forgiveness, not nostalgia, but acceptance. A recognition that love, when it collapses under the weight of ego and fear, doesn't vanish. It transforms into a mirror, showing us the damage we carry and the damage we cause. Amber, meanwhile, left Hollywood for a while. She found quiet in another country, raising her daughter away from the noise. Those close to her say she writes again, not to publish, but to remember who she was before the fire. Perhaps in her own silence. She has also understood what he meant, that the truth is not an absolute, but a reflection clear, then distorted, depending on where you stand. And so the great revelation of their story is not that one lied and the other told the truth. It's that both were right, and both were wrong, trapped in a narrative larger than themselves. In the end, neither love nor justice could save them. But perhaps they didn't need saving. Perhaps what they needed, what they finally found, was the courage to stop performing. Because the trial that changed Hollywood did not end in the courtroom. It ended here, in the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest act of truth is simply to say nothing at all. The story of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard will be remembered as a storm, one that swept through Hollywood, tearing down illusions of romance, fame, and truth itself. But when the dust settled, what remained was not victory or defeat, only the faint sound of two hearts still beating beneath the noise. In the years since, both have retreated from the spotlight that once defined them. The cameras no longer chase every glance or gesture. Their names, once weapons in a cultural war, now carry the quiet weight of survival. And maybe that's what this story was always about, not who was right, but who managed to live through being wrong. Depp once said in that 2025 interview, "I don't regret fighting. I regret needing to..." His words carry a paradox. Only pain can teach that the need to prove innocence can destroy the very soul you're trying to defend. He learned that justice, no matter how pure it sounds, can never replace peace. Amber, too, has been seen differently, not through the prism of headlines, but through the eyes of those who know her as a mother, an artist, a woman still learning how to exist without explanation. In her quiet reemergence lies a form of redemption, not forgiveness from the world, but from herself. Together, they embody a truth larger than their tragedy, that love, when mixed with fame, becomes radioactive, powerful enough to illuminate, but lethal when mishandled. Their story exposed the fragility of the human heart beneath celebrity armor, and the danger of a society that confuses empathy with entertainment. What remains now is silence, the kind that follows the end of a long song. It is not empty. It is full of lessons, of ghosts, of recognition. Somewhere in that silence, Johnny paints, Amber writes, and both continue to exist beyond the myth that once consumed them. And if there is one message to take from the ashes of their love, it might be this: truth may win in court, but healing happens only in the heart. Because justice, for all its power, can never resurrect what love has destroyed. It can only ask the question softly, endlessly. What would you give to be understood? And what would you give up to find peace?